Greetings and welcome to week 7 for our class New Testament studies. Just wanted to say again a word of commendation to all of you for good work on your discussion board post and especially to those of you who really took all the guidelines and the instructions and followed them through and really wrestled with some of the things I was suggesting in both the email and the video last week. And kudos to all of you and appreciate that very much. All right, so here we are in week 7, and we've got another wonderful question before us with regard to our discussion board post. And on your website, you'll see the question is, in spite of the diversity of the New Testament writings, is there one main theme that unites all the books of the New Testament? If so, what is it? Can you state it in one concise and powerful sentence? Well, really what happens here is now we are kind of stretching beyond the borders of New Testament studies or New Testament intro. That's probably why the course has been properly named New Testament Studies, not just New Testament Intro, because what we're doing is we're reaching into another field of biblical studies called biblical theology. And this is a very oft discussed question in biblical theology, both for Old and New Testament. What do you think is the center, the mit, sometimes as we'll talk about or as you'll hear, what is the one organizing theme that pulls all of the biblical revelation together? So that's really what you're being asked here to give some consideration to. So let me just give you a little bit of perspective first of all as you wrestle with this question. I really don't expect you to come up with this stellar, one theme that knocks it completely out of the park, because it's such a massive conversation that's going on. I think right now where you will show competency and your grasp of what you've been reading and understanding is an ability to kind of digest all of your reading as it relates to these various books and to surface or to identify what seems to be an outstanding theme that you're noticing as you're reading through Gundry and reading about the background and the themes and the theologies of each of these books. So that's awesome, and I hope that that's something that you'll keep perspective on as you work your way through this. Now, that being said, let me just say that by way of perspective, there's a lot of conversation about this particular topic, and there are many who will say that it's impossible to identify one theme. Perhaps there are several, and there are some really good textbooks that are out there. So as you go out beyond your textbook in your reading of Gundry, take a look at biblical theology works as well. This will be really helpful to you and perhaps give you some perspective on how you could give a knowledgeable response to this discussion board question this week. One writer by the name of Gerhard Hassel, I was just trying to show you some of the textbooks that I think you might find appropriate. Here is Gerhard Hassel's New Testament Theology, Issues in Current Debate. And let me just, as I open it up here, let me just show you the intro. Perhaps you could see that, I'm not sure. Try to get it focused on there. But you can see, here's the question that we're dealing with. Here's a whole division given to this particular discussion board question: the center and unity in the New Testament theology, the issue, the quest for center, and then you see the various selections that he's identified: anthropology, salvation history, covenant, love, and other proposals, Christology, the center of the New Testament, and the canon within the canon. So that's Hassel's approach. And this particular textbook is often cited as a must-read in the area of New Testament theology. So you can see his struggle over one identifying theme. The other one that I wanted to draw your attention to is one by, it's really a compendium of articles. It's in Biblical Theology. Scott Hafeman is the editor. But what I like about what Hafeman does, there's an article in here by Andreas Kostenberger. a New Testament scholar from Trinity Seminary out in Deerfield, Illinois. And he lists a couple of really interesting observations with regard to center. And these include Christ, and we saw that in Hassel's book, The One God. And of course, several scholars will go with God as being the organizing theme and the organizing person of both Old and New Testament. The gospel, kingdom is another one, covenant is another one. From an Old Testament studies perspective, I like to think about covenant as an organizing theme, at least one of the major ones that pulls together all of the diverse content of the Old Testament books of the Bible. And so you could run with one idea that stands out to you as you've been doing your reading in Gundry, and as you've read Gundry and read the scriptures alongside of that, you've noted, maybe it's grace, maybe it's the gospel, maybe it's Christ, whatever. You've seen something that's stood out to you across your reading. Well, go with it. Write it out, support it with some scripture, and then I like how the discussion board post encourages us to, in one concise and powerful statement, summarize what you feel would be the theme for your understanding of that organizing principle in the New Testament scriptures. Now if you don't feel comfortable with just one, then it's perfectly fine from my perspective if you had maybe two big ideas that you want to bring together, maybe three. I wouldn't dilute it. And that's the thing, don't dilute it with one big idea that, of course, nobody can argue with, but really doesn't wrestle with the diversity of the material. So give some thought to how what you're selecting is not only unifying, but unifying in a very meaningful way. And, you can show that meaning, that intentionality by citing a couple of scriptures that would show how it all comes together and how it is all pulled together. So, in my personal opinion on this, as I was asked and as I researched it and so forth, I've thought about sort of a multiplex canonical approach. In other words, that's several ideas coming together. I've thought about obviously the fact that God and Christ are strong, not only persons, eternal persons that the material is organized around, but they are indeed the strong themes that in a historic, biblical, eternal kind of sense unite the scriptures. And then I certainly like the idea of covenant and kingdom, pulling those in as ways in which the New Testament material is organized. And of course, gospel is always a strong candidate in my mind. And seeing it not just a prayer you pray, a couple of basic truths you believe, but seeing the gospel as something that's really big and rich and thorough and all-encompassing and organizing. All right, so I hope that helps you. I'll try to transcribe this in some bullet points, push them out to you as an announcement, but always good to be able just to make some verbal contact with you in this kind of a way, and also be able to give you my 2 cents on the question and how you can frame your answer and some guidance there. So hope this video was helpful to you to that end.